I was socialized as a straight white female, right? So being into my late 30s before I even started having questioning thoughts, it meant that not only in the grander public, but even within queer communities, asexuality is still kind of not really recognized, especially because it is so straight passing in a heterosexual world because of their blatantly not heterosexual being. I have a hard time accepting asexuality as part of that queer umbrella. But generally, when I'm talking to people, I'll just say I'm queer. I will say that I'm asexual, aromantic, and if they want more information, they'll ask. But I find that always comes with a lot of questions. So it kind of depends on the audience. Who am I talking to? Who does it matter to? But if it's just somebody wanting to know if I identify as queer, I'll just say yes. I also find myself on the polyamorous scale, which is queer umbrella adjacent. A lot of the times, especially in media, that we have heard even the mention of asexual, it has a lot to do with the eunuch movement in the Middle Ages, where men would castrate themselves in order to become more faithful to God. And so it completely removed a hormonal component within that group of people as a radical expression of faith. And so growing up in the 80s, that was the only thing that was talked about in regards to not wanting sex is, are you a eunuch? Then from that place, when you saw it show up in television shows, you would see asexuality displayed as somebody who is not just asexual, but also has no libido and is also sex repulsed, right? Like, so it was like the far extreme of all of those spectrums. Yeah. And so I think that's part of the challenge right now, and what people are going through is they're figuring out, some people will identify as asexual, but what they really are is sex repulsed, right? Like, and so figuring out how those titles actually interact with your sexuality as opposed to libido, as opposed to romanticism and connection, is a really complicated path. It's still fluid. I think it runs great parallels with what we see in regards to the trans conversation and levels of understanding in the community, just because there are so many unknowns and undefinables, and each of those things is unique to each person experiencing it. It's quite easy to say I'm lesbian, which I'm not, but that's a very strict category of what you're willing to and not willing to do. Whereas somebody who's pansexual has a harder time explaining it. And I believe asexuality falls into that as well, because it's not a binary, it's not sex and no sex, because sex has so many different meanings, or somewhere in between. So is directly linked to an emotional desire to connect, specifically through kink. I have very little interest in vanilla sex. I don't find it fulfilling. And I think that directly relates to the fact that I'm not visually sexually attracted to people. My libido comes down to an interest in power dynamics, in giving up control, being able to let go of certain aspects of my personality, because I come across as an A-type personality in a lot of spaces, and I was conditioned that way by my dad. There's a lot of unpacking I have to do within myself, but a space that I can do that in is in a BDSM space where I can allow myself to be small and let go and those kinds of things. So giving myself emotional space to experience things differently than I do in my day-to-day is what drives my libido. Like, it gives me a little fantasy space to play in. And that is not at all remotely related to romance, right? Like, the idea of being wooed makes me uncomfortable. That's like, I don't understand what that is, because I don't have the corresponding sexualized vision to go with it. I wish to connect with someone in a way that I know they're emotionally considering me. And I don't care if it's a chocolate bar without me asking, or if he's on the other side of town and he knows there's a restaurant that I like over there. Do you want me to pick you something? Those things. Whereas most people may consider them romantic, for me, it's an emotional reaffirmation of my choice. Our society is so driven by the relationship escalator, that
Yes.
it doesn't take time to consider that you may have different types of connections. And the
Yeah.
polyamory thing for me isn't about sexual connections. The polyamory bit for me is about my capacity to love in many different ways. That can
Hmm.
be an aesthetic appreciation, it can be an emotional appreciation, it could, like, there's so many different, it can
Yeah.
be sapphic without sex. Like, I think women are beautiful, I just don't want to get in bed with any of them. um, the the safety and the comfort and the things that you can find in different connections, that don't overlap or replace any other particular partner. And so I think honestly asexuality kind of works in tandem with those, because you have to, in polyamory, you have to break down what your connection actually means to somebody in order to do that ethically. And so then in asexuality, it's the same thing. You have to break down what you're feeling and why, and maybe why not.
Okay.
And there's somebody who's unhappy with my intersectional feminist views, and they'll go to my Facebook page and see that I identify as polyamorous and demisexual and the mother, and they will try to attack me that way. Oh, well, you're ruining your children and you're a terrible parent. And it's a direct reflection of how they feel about queer people and not specifically about me. I think that asexuality is unknown and polyamory is misnown. People think polyamorous, they think swingers clubs, they think unethical cheating. As you say, we're reparenting ourselves. We are cycle breaking, and that is the hardest thing. There's no space. there's no let me get back to you on that. I have a situation and I have to manage it. And
Yeah.
not only do I have to manage them and their feelings, but I also have to manage me and my feelings. I apologize to Rose. Being a misogynistic, fat phobic, homophobic narcissist, my dad was never wrong, ever. Someone confronted me about the emotional space that I was holding in regards to being brought up in a conservative home, and my ideas around slut shaming and morality based on sexuality and things like this. And essentially told me, because she'd been a mother friend with a daughter that was Rose's age, and we were hanging out a lot and spending a lot of time together. And I posted, there was a photo a number of years ago of a woman's leg with a high skirt on it and different marks at the level of the leg saying what kind of woman she was based on her skirt length. And she's like, if this is how you feel, I can't be your friend anymore. And it took somebody else calling me out on my shit to put me on my heels, starting on this path of figuring out that what I'd been conditioned with wasn't good. And so it all started to change. We have zero body shame in our home. And that's something that I brought in right away because I was ashamed of my body. And so I definitely have a gentle parenting style, because I had the exact opposite of that, which was a very strict and physically consequence style. So I'm so impassioned about making sure I'm there every step for my kids, whether that's with their body acceptance, with understanding that being straight is not the only orientation out there, how to help manage their emotional relationships with friends. I've never been like, no, you're not bi, it's just a fit, like it's, if you're bi, you're bi, and let's celebrate that. And if you're not, you're not, and you can change at any time. It's you don't have to choose one color for the rest of your life, the completely disassociated version of what parenting is like as a queer polyamorous divorced woman. I think reassuring children who are in narcissistic homes that ultimately they're the ones that get to choose what their relationship with their parents look like is probably the most powerful thing you can do. And I think it's very similar for children who are queer and in homes that they can't relate to their family in. You can also choose what your relationship level is with your family. Phrases family of choice and family of origin were a massive turning point for me. And maybe that would be the concept that I would explain to my 12-year-old self. Right? Like, you're attracted to this person. Why? Do you like the way they look? Does that make you feel something sexually, or does that make you feel something in your heart? I think the biggest misconception around asexuality is what we talked about earlier, how sexuality, libido, and attraction are all very different things. About how the misconception stems from the portrayals of the extremes in social media and just regular media, and that it's still a new topic because people are uncomfortable talking about sex, right?
Yeah.
Like, the church has been the narrative for so long that it's a man and a woman and that's it. And it doesn't matter if you really love each other once you're in a marriage, that's it. And, like, a woman's obligations to have sex with her husband, that's it. That such tight rules of what things are allowed to be, and that's not how humans exist.